What if everything you thought you knew about your astrological sign was wrong? For centuries, the map we use to navigate our consciousness has been incomplete, excluding the most powerful piece of the puzzle. This full moon in Taurus, shadowed by the sun in Ophiuchus, isn't just a celestial event, it's a cosmic correction. Hey there, Truth Seeker. Welcome to the Starkittens community where we discuss 13 sign astrology. Are you in alignment with your divine design? Do you want to master the metaphysical reality? Open the doors of perception. Each planetary body is an archetype, a template, if you will, that helps us interpret human behavior in the world around us. The more awake and aware we are, the more synchronicity will show up in your life. Our focus today is the full moon in Taurus, shining bright while the sun travels through the mystical 13th sign, Ophiuchus. This powerful lunation urges us to bridge the quantum field with the physical world, emphasizing the healing and manifestation power of Ophiuchus as the Integrator. This discussion is a 3-part journey where we explore the Ophiuchus energy in each of the 12 houses. Part 1, houses 1 through 4. Part 2, houses 5 through 8. Part 3, houses 9 through 12. To help us reach more souls with this important message, please like, share and subscribe. There's a lot going on, so let's jump in. Kia ora, David.
Kia ora.
Ophiuchus season is upon us and it's a very special time for both of us. Last time we spoke about how you found Ophiuchus a few years ago and how it made a very big impact on your life. So today we are talking about not the moon in Ophiuchus but the sun in Ophiuchus. It is there for about 19 days. So during the time of this full moon, on the other side, we have Taurus, which is also a big energy for both of us. I love that this is all coming together. So what can you tell us today about this Taurian energy governed by the moon? So for me, that is the emotional body we'll talk about today. But then there's this overlay of Ophiuchus combined with that. So how do you interpret those?
Yeah, Taurus is probably one of the easiest signs to interpret because it's an earth sign. It is therefore representative of the body and the physical world, and beyond that there's not a lot to understand about Taurus. I mean, it's typically associated with resources as the natural ruler or guardian of the second house, but what are resources? I mean, those resources have been generally are known as money, but I think that those resources are also our physical resources. So that means anything that we can do, any skills that we have that we bring to the table, is also covered by the Taurus energy. Of course, the spirit animal for Taurus is again one of the most well known, which is the bull. And if I'm being uncharitable, there's that expression, bull in a china shop. So there's a side of Taurus which can be quite blunt and, aggressive even. But there's another side of Taurus because of the rulership of Venus, which is much more sensuous and beautiful and celebrated. So, we like to talk about both sides of the signs. There's a shadow side to Taurus, which is the stubbornness and resistance to change, a la the bull digging in. But at the same time, if we look to the guardian of that sign being Venus, Taurus is often associated with materialism, wealth, sensuality, meaning, indulgence of the senses, beauty, There's a lot of really positive aspects to Taurus as well. But whenever we talk about a moon or a lunation, we have to remember that the moon only sits, because it moves so fast, it only sits in a sign, for maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 days, depending on how large that sign is under the 13 sign astrology system. So the feeling that we get from a in this case a Taurus full moon is going to be quite fleeting, but it will show up in our bodies or in our physical surroundings. The overlay of Ophiuchus is that we may get some insights into our resources. We may get some insights into our physical surroundings. We'll talk more about Ophiuchus in a moment, but it's a time to be what the Ophiuchian energy brings to any sign, whether it's in a full moon or a conjunction or whatever it is a heightened awareness of that sign. So Ophiuchus, if we were thinking about, let's say, our jobs, our resources, our physical environment, our bodies, we were struggling with something, we may get some insights as to how to move forward. We may get some divine intervention. We may get some of those aha moments, being the influence of Ophiuchus on the other side.
So on the other side, just for those who haven't seen the chart, the sun sits at 5 degrees Ophiuchus during this full moon, and the full moon occurs on the 5th of December here in New Zealand, just after midday, and at that time the moon is sitting at 19 degrees Taurus. So let's jump more into Ophiuchus then. So what does Ophiuchus mean? You've mentioned that Taurus is an earth sign. So what is Ophiuchus? How can you educate us more about this beautiful 13th sign?
Well, I think the key thing is there's so many aspects to Ophiuchus that we could be talking for an hour or more. So, but from a high level, the first thing is that we know that Ophiuchus is a constellation that the sun travels through. So the sun has what they call an ecliptic, which means that its passage around all of the constellations constitutes a solar year. And Ophiuchus is one of the constellations that the sun visits. So therefore, it is important for us in any astrological interpretation to include Ophiuchus in our discussions. Unfortunately, the 12th sign, as we've talked about, and as those listening will realise, excludes Ophiuchus, even though the sun does spend time there, and that's a verifiable scientific fact. There is a tweet, I've got a link somewhere, that NASA did many years ago, where they came out and said something like, all you astrologers who don't include Ophiuchus, you've got it wrong, because the sun does spend some time in there. And so the first thing that I always arrive at when thinking about Ophiuchus is that because it cuts that Scorpio constellation, almost in 2/3 of Scorpio disappears because of the Ophiuchus constellation, which is right alongside. So when the sun's going through Scorpio, as we talked about last time, and as we've identified in our previous podcast, the sun only spends 7 days in Scorpio, thereabouts. So what that means from a high level is that straight away there will be people who are listening to this who think there are Scorpios. They may be a Scorpio sun or Scorpio moon or some other Scorpio energy, when in fact they've got an Ophiuchus energy. So what that raises immediately is that Ophiuchus is a misunderstood energy. And it's a sign that, because it's not, and I'll be clear about this, it's not actively involved in the Western astrological systems, but if you look into the Chinese mythology and some of the Eastern, they absolutely reference they call Ophiuchus the dragon energy. And the dragon energy, it is also interpreted in some Eastern mythologies as the serpent energy as well. And so, when we look at the schism between the Western system of astrology, which is what many people follow, which is a false overlay, and then we look at the Eastern interpretation of the cosmos, the Eastern may not call it Ophiuchus, but they absolutely include her energy in their system. So, the first thing, as I said, is that she is an energy that needs to be included for an interpretation to be correct. And the great tragedy, I think, for under the 12 sign system and not including Ophiuchus is that people who are carrying the resonance and energy and signature of Ophiuchus are not expressing it fully because they're not aware that they contain that energy. But not being aware of it and what it means, which we'll touch on a little later in this discussion, is that you're not in alignment with your divine design. And I can talk with some confidence about this, as can you, because, when I recast my chart from a 12 sign to a 13 sign, in fact, I thought I was a Sagittarius moon, but I ended up being a Ophiuchus moon. So that was a big change. There's a big, big difference between Sagittarius and Ophiuchus. And on the other side, of course, there are Scorpios who are in fact Libras. And so you have this, by bringing her energy in, it's very disruptive, and it's incredibly disruptive to our mindset. It's incredibly disruptive to our patterns of behavior when dealing with astrology. And I think that's a nice place to leave that initial sort of overview of Ophiuchus, is that she is disruptive to our consciousness.
Yes. And also you've spoken in the past as well that she has no opposite in the 13th sign, and it is not an earth, it's not a fire, a water, or an air. Her element is ether, which also can work with each of the other elements, right?
That's exactly right. And there's so many overlays between the different systems of numerology, sacred geometry, astrology, and other, even tarot. These systems have many crossovers. And when we look at the sacred geometry and you talk about 5 elements, although the pentagram has been messed with, its original signal to us was that there are 5 elements, and that 5th element is ether. Now, ether is very interesting. Again, you can spend so much time focusing on ether because there's a lot of different angles to come at. But if Ophiuchus represents the energy of ether, then yes, she is the 5th element, which means she is the secret ingredient that we're missing. And one of the stories that I like to tell about Ophiuchus being that 5th element of ether, which can be spelt in 2 ways. Of course, ether, E-T-H-E-R, but there are others who spell ether A-E-T-H-E-R. And even that in and of itself is interesting when you look at the etymology of that, but we'll keep that to another time. But ether, if we jump out of astrology and we look at, if you do some research, talk to ChatGPT, go on the web, have a look, and you will find that ether was originally considered to be by the astrophysicists. This is back in the 60s, in the time of Einstein, when there was a lot of this, what we call quantum knowledge was beginning to be seeded in the universities at the university level. Of course, Einstein is one of the most famous protagonists of the quantum field. And in the modern sort of pseudoscience and manifestation space, there's a huge amount of talk about the quantum field. Well, the quantum field refers to the ether. Now, the astroscientists and the physicists in the 60s considered ether to be the field. When they were looking at how manifestation occurs, they understood that manifestation started in the pre-manifestation stage. So the manifestation stage would be Taurus, the physical world, but prior to or pre-manifestation is where the ether or the field comes from. And so vibration, energy, frequencies transmit through the field of ether. So therefore, Ophiuchus, being ether, represents the field. And that would be why Ophiuchus can go with any of the other signs. Because if you thought of it as a simple alchemist, say as an experimenter, you could think, I can add fire to ether or ether to fire, or I can add water or earth or air to ether, and it will always work, because ether is the field. And if the field in mythology, so in the science they call it the field or the quantum field, or the pre-manifestation phase prior to Taurus manifestation. The other thing to consider about ether is that if it's the field, that means in some interpretations that Ophiuchus, being ether, is also the womb of creation. And so therefore this is where the resonances with the divine feminine come in, as opposed to the sacred masculine, which is Pisces. So the beauty of introducing ether and Ophiuchus into this beautiful astrological system, which is the right thing to do because the sun spends time there, is that we get a clear distinction between the sacred masculine of Pisces and the divine feminine of Ophiuchus. And we know that when we're talking about manifestation and the polarities of the negative and the positive, that the ether represents the feminine energy and Pisces represents the masculine energy, and it is the combination of those two energies that gives us the physical world which we experience in Taurus.
Yes, yeah, thank you. I guess it's pretty mind-boggling for a lot of people who are just unaware that the 12 sign system it is made up. It is just a perfect circle divided into 12 equal pieces, all 30 degrees, and it's not the reality. And yeah, I find it fascinating that so many of us have followed it for that long, because we just don't take the time to actually do some astronomy lessons, I guess, to see the difference in size between Sagittarius and a Scorpio. Scorpio is so small, it takes such a long time. It takes such a short time for any planetary body to travel through that. But to continue with Ophiuchus, but I think because this is kind of for those who are new or those who have listened to us for a while, I think it's good to reiterate some of the Ophiuchus energies, how they go with the different houses. So for me, Ophiuchus sits in my first house. My first house is quite large. I am a Scorpio rising, but then I transform that into a beautiful Ophiuchus energy and finish off with Sagittarius. And so what would you mind to again tell us what it would mean for someone to have an Ophiuchus in each of the houses, and then someone can get in touch to figure out what is my true 13 sign astrology chart look like?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question, because everyone has an Ophiuchus house, and that means that right now the sun is touching that part of their chart. And if we are to come into alignment with our divine design and we're not aware of that, of the power of Ophiuchus, and we're not aware of the manifestation power of Ophiuchus, we may be missing an ingredient that is preventing us from fully expressing who we are or experiencing what it is that we might experience within the domain of that house. So I will go into that briefly in a moment, but I'd also say that, in addition to the ether, the field, the role that Ophiuchus energy plays in the manifestation process, which is Taurus, the other side of this is that, in some spiritual circles, the Ophiuchian energy is considered to be what they call the quintessence or the divine spirit as well. So there are, like I said in the beginning, there are many pieces and aspects to the Ophiuchian energy. And I don't think even this podcast as much as we will try to touch on her influence on each of the houses and give a little bit of the background and the tie over or the crossover into the physical world and then the quantum world and the pre-manifestation ideas of the field and how the field actually works, I don't think we'll do it justice, because she's so, in many ways, it is so difficult to interpret, but at the same time, she's ever present. And, you know, any of us who believe that there is a divine feminine Godhead as well as a divine masculine Godhead, which I certainly do, when it comes to, you know, they are equal, they are opposite, they are both part of the puzzle, that the patriarchal system has deliberately kept her out of the picture. And they've done that because they don't want the Ophiuchus energy to have that in the minds of followers, you know, of patriarchal systems. Patriarchal systems are command and control systems. And you mentioned before, just before I go into this houses analysis, that, you know, the 12 sign astrology was designed, again, if you check it in the generators, go into the AI generators and ask the question and probe into the whole idea of Ptolemaic system, P-T-O-L-E-M-Y, Ptolemy. And he was the father of the 12 sign system. That's why it's called the Ptolemaic system. And it is inconceivable that nature, being as perfect and imperfect and imperfectly perfect as it is, would divide such an important map of consciousness into 12 equal signs. I mean, that in and of itself is inconceivable. To me it is, because nowhere, I mean, whilst you might see perfect symmetry in leaves or a shell or a snowflake when you look through a microscope, there's symmetry there. But everywhere else we look in nature, I'm looking out the window now, and whilst it's all seems to be rather random, it's all very coordinated. And so, you know, nature is messy, and therefore the Ophiuchus energy is messy because she disrupts and upsets everything that we understand about each of these houses. So with all of that said, as a kind of a preamble, I'll touch briefly on my interpretation as an astrologer of 4 decades, and my understanding of what each of the 12 houses represents, and therefore what Ophiuchus energy represents within those houses. The first house is the house of personality and projection. So if you have an Ophiuchus energy, in fact, I'll back up just for a moment. Ophiuchus is what I call the integrator. So she integrates with everything, and we touched on that before. Aether integrates with everything and enhances and amplifies that house. So she can enhance and amplify, in this case, the first house of personality and projection. She will enhance and amplify people's understanding of themselves. She will enhance and amplify their understanding of their personality and their understanding of how we wear masks. You know, the first house is also the house of the ascendant, which is our public face. And so, you know, I think of an example where Ophiuchus might be very helpful, is if somebody was struggling with their self-esteem or their self-confidence, or they were struggling with imposter syndrome, or they were struggling to be authentic, then an Ophiuchus energy in the first house will help that person, if they tap into and are consciously aware of this ether energy, which is not only an integrator but is a healing modality as well. And healing meaning that we are in disintegration. If integrity means that something is whole and complete in and of itself, then disintegration and healing is required when our understanding of something is disintegrated, so it is not whole. So if in the first house we have this Ophiuchus energy and we are feeling like a split personality, or we issues, you know, just in ourselves, this Ophiuchus energy might be the key to understanding some of that. that second house of Taurus is resources, and very simply, or put simply, Ophiuchus here is going to help us with the manifestation process. You know, she may, if you've got a very strongly aspected second house with Ophiuchus, you may find that you are a master manifester without even realizing that energy is actually coming from Ophiuchus. If she is the womb of creation, then she is the key to manifestation. As Dispenza talks about, we have to have electro and magnetism. And if magnetism is the feminine energy and electro is the masculine energy, that's the plus and the minus. If you look at a battery, you get the positive and negative polarities. Electromagnetism, again, comes back to the feminine and the masculine energy working together. So an Ophiuchus second house would give us massive strengths and advantages in physical manifestation and in understanding the manifestation process, and in fact truly deeply understanding how it works in the quantum field. I'll touch on the third house and then we'll take a pause, and you might want to reflect on those rather than go through all 12 at once. But the third house is, of course, what we call the house of communication and childhood learning, right? And we spent time previously talking about how that house being ruled or overseen by Mercury relates to childhood experiences. But if we go deeper, an Ophiuchian energy, those childhood experiences set up for our later life, our reality. Like the way that we learned as children is the way that we see the world as adults. And how we learn is such an important key to understanding not only ourselves, first house, manifestation, second house, but also where we may be blocked, where we may be struggling. It might come back to that third house of how we learn to deal with problems, how we learn to communicate how we are feeling, how we learn to interact with our siblings. There is so much tied up in that third house that Ophiuchus energy there, again, as the integrator, as the healer, as the provider of profound insight. If we have, blocks, even with relating to siblings, if we have learning blocks or learning disabilities, if we have an inability to understand concepts and abstractions, if we have childhood trauma tied up in that learning process, that's where the Ophiuchian energy is going to be very strong. And remember that Ophiuchus in the third house, if people aren't including her in the 12 sign astrology, they may not even realize that they've got an Ophiuchus third house. They may be there struggling with, bedeviled with these childhood thoughts and these childhood memories of difficult learning experiences. I felt silly as a child learning, or I was bullied by my brothers and sisters, or I never got a word in edgeways, or because of the way my mind was working as a 7 or 8 year old, I never understood school. All of that's tied up in that third house. Well, if we are using astrology as a pathway to help us understand ourselves, then wouldn't we want to know that we've got Ophiuchus in the third house? Because imagine what that can unlock once you really start to tap into that.
Yeah. So for me, to the other energies, I find a little bit easier to know what to do if there is a block. The word block that you just said just really jumped out. Like if I feel a physical block, then for me it is getting out in nature and just connecting with the earth. But if there is that block, so let's say someone has a very strong Ophiuchian energy governing their third house, how would they deal with a blockage there? How would are there some tools you could think of to incorporate that?
Well, the key to Ophiuchus is mindfulness and meditation. I mean, the first thing is that you can't tap into the field. You can't tap into the resonance of the field and what may exist as potential in the field. Remember that the field is pre-manifestation. So if we think about blockages being something that is manifesting in our physical reality, and if we're looking at the preceding house of Taurus, we talked about the physical. So a block for a natural healer may be showing up in the body, but may be expressing as emotions. But if we understand how our emotions are a signal of blockages, but they're actually, the root of blockages is actually existing in the physical body. It has to exist in the physical body because that's where our memories are trapped, if you like. So when you talk about modalities to unlock childhood traumas, learning disabilities, communication issues, either over communication or under communication, a lack of confidence that may be arising from that mercurial third house, you have to start with mindfulness and meditation, which says that you need to be quiet and you need to listen and ask and say, well, I call upon the insight of Ophiuchus, of Mother God, to help me understand what it is that I need to see. And then be open to anything. This could come, we talk about the Iranian energy as being that lightning. It's kind of like that, but it's more nuanced than that, because to me, as an Ophiuchus moon, and having really embraced that energy, she sits in my 7th house of relationships, but my moon is very firmly in Ophiuchus. What that does is heighten my intuition, and the way that I access my Ophiuchus energy is through mindfulness and meditation, is through being still and quiet. But if you're also talking about blockages in the physical body, or blockages in our physical environment, the physical body requires us to get in touch with those modalities of healing, things like tapping, acupressure, even chiropractor, manipulation. We were talking about the atlas and the spine. There's so many of these that can unlock, blockages. And those blockages, the blockage that we're feeling or that we're talking about is a physical experience of it, but it came from a pre-manifestation. It was always energy or frequency or vibration to start with. Even thought is a frequency or a vibration. Even words start as a frequency or a vibration. So everything that we are blocked with started actually before, we physically felt it. And this is why the Ophiuchian energy is so interesting too, because we have to go into the field to deal with whatever it is, which again comes back to the answer to the question, which is, how do you access Ophiuchus? Will you access her through, firstly, you have to be in mindfulness and meditation. There's no way around that. And in a state of receptivity, and being in a mindset and a willingness to be open to a solution that may come in the strangest way. It may come in an obvious way, but again, Ophiuchus being the field and being so elusive, there is no preset formula. And so the only way really to tap into her as a door opener or a lever to deal with trauma, blockages, resistance, lack of confidence, whatever it is it always starts with introspection and going inward and being quiet and listening. Not just to our hearts, not just to our soul, but to that energy that can come down through the third eye and the crown. And we were talking about those higher chakras the other day. The energies of the higher self, which, for those who believe in the higher self structure, the higher self does not actually exist in the body, it exists in the field. So we need to be tapping into the field, and we need to be accessing it in ways that go beyond human understanding, which means stilling the mind, which means meditation and mindfulness. And I heard Dolores Cannon explain it beautifully, and the Zen Buddhists say exactly the same thing, that when you are meditating or in mindfulness, it's the gaps in between the thoughts that are the field. So the thoughts are nodes, if you like, but it's the gap. Sometimes you're in reverie, you can just be looking outside, looking at a horizon. You see it often with kids, they're just in reverie, they're just, You think they're daydreaming, but that's the gaps between the thoughts. That is where we access Ophiuchus.
And it's almost like we are being kept busy on purpose to stay away from that connecting with the field, and bombarded by having to work the latest gadgets, the latest games, the latest television shows. We all need to be able to have the conversation about all that, and therefore we don't prioritize time for mindfulness and meditation. And I'm teaching my daughter to do that before she falls asleep listening to meditation, but I think it's enough for now for her to kind of go, I can be quiet, rather than falling asleep reading a book or playing a game or whatever anyone else does these days to fall asleep. Medication is another one. So the fourth house is lineage and roots. It is also the house guarded, or the guardian is the moon. So the Ophiuchus energy there, how would you integrate that?
Yeah, I mean, when I was thinking about that before, and I think about where we are in the modern world, then an Ophiuchus in the fourth house of lineage and roots, is what we call the fourth house, lineage and roots, would be a master geneticist, would be an absolute expert at understanding the human genome, would be an expert at understanding epigenetics, would be an expert at understanding aging and, biotechnologies. I mean, highly advanced knowledge will come through an Ophiuchus, somebody who has an Ophiuchus in the fourth house. It would also tap into, of course, the fourth house is the repository of soul. And, we talk about the moon as the repository of soul memories. So an Ophiuchus, and as I said before, this is my own experience, Ophiuchus gives you almost like lifts the veil between your soul memories, which exist in the quantum field. If we think of the world in the quantum, then we exist in the past, the present, and the future all at the same time. We have multiple realities. And so our soul, when we talk about past life regressions, and people often want to get a sense of who they are today, they will tap into that fourth house energy. That's why we call it lineage and roots. But what's behind the lineage and roots is the soul memories. It's those memories that go beyond the neural memories that we contain for this timeline. The way that I distinguish between, there's two types of memories. There's the memories of this timeline which exist in our physical brain, that becomes active when we are born into this physical body, and you can say, I was born on this date, and as long as I'm alive, then I've got a bunch of memories. But then there's a whole lot of other memories which people like to tap into through psychic enablements and connections. What are they tapping into? They're tapping into their soul memories, which is that fourth house of lineage and roots. Dolores Cannon, I mentioned her before, so many people were interested in going into the deep hypnosis state in order to tap into, I was existing in some other timeline, and when they would listen to the recordings of that, they would feel a sense of connection. They often feel, through lineage and roots or the fourth house experience, they may feel drawn to a particular place on the world. They may feel drawn into particular, they've got memories of having been around when Atlantis or Lemuria or the, dramatic events in the world in terms of history. Even though they're living in 2025, they've got a memory of that. That's all that fourth house. So if you think about Ophiuchus and the fourth house of lineage and roots and soul memory and genetics as well, see, genetics contains memory. Genetics contains code. So I would argue that, or present for people to think about, that an Ophiuchus fourth house is probably one of the most powerful places for Ophiuchus to exist, because she just unlocks so much in terms of profound not only personal knowledge that you are carrying in your soul's experience, but also knowledge of the world, of other realities, of the great cosmos that we're a part of. So it's a very, very powerful place for Ophiuchus to exist as that fourth house. Very powerful.
So you listening, where does your Ophiuchian energy interact in your natal chart? You can get a chart from us, just remember, or a full-on natal reading as well.